Dobry wieczór. Good evening.
Good afternoon. Good evening.
Nazywam się Michał Wiśniewski. Mam przyjemność reprezentować Międzynarodowe Centrum Kultury w Krakowie. Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie na spotkaniu z Bobbym Krellem, synem Olgi Krell, Dintuch, wnukiem Alfreda Düntucha. Nasze dzisiejsze spotkanie zorganizowane jest w związku z Międzynarodowym Dniem Ochrony Zabytków. Chcielibyśmy dyskutować o ochronie dziedzictwa modernizmu, o ochronie architektury międzywojennej. Łączymy się dzisiaj z Sao Paulo. Nasza dyskusja będzie prowadzona w języku angielskim. Wszystkim osobom, dla których może nie jest to najbardziej wygodne, chcę zapewnić, że translacja tego spotkania także na język migowy będzie udostępniona w naszych mediach społecznościowych, w mediach społecznościowych Międzynarodowego Centrum Kultury już niedługo. A tymczasem przeskakuję na język angielski. Good evening. I would like to cordially welcome Mr. Robert Krell, Bobby Krell, who accepted our invitation to bring us to Sao Paulo and to discuss with us the really amazing, unusual story of Alfred Dintuch, Krakowian-based architect, one of the stars of the modern architecture in Krakow during the 1930s. Together with Stefana Landsbergera, he completed more than 30 buildings within just 8 years. So it was a very speedy time. He was extremely active and extremely successful as well. I should emphasize this very issue of his activity. And well, today I would like to talk with Bobby Krell about his Krakow years, but also about the years after the World War II, when together with his family, he moved away from Poland, from Krakow to Brazil, to Sao Paulo, and he continued his career again in a very successful way. Today, we would also like to talk about Alfred Dintuch's daughter and Bobby Krell mother, namely Olga Krell, the grand lady of Brazilian design, one of the, I wanted to say father figure, but I should say mother figure of discussion about modern decoration, modern interior design in South America in general. So I will start this very discussion with a very brief presentation about Alfred Dintuch. It is just here. Only a few minutes to present what actually he did and what actually we can prize today in the city of Krakow, hanging around especially Free Poets Boulevard, especially along the Juliusz Słowacki Avenue. We can see some of the best of his works. Here we can see Alfred Dintuch. This photo was taken in Brazil. And here we can see a very successful businessman and very successful architect practicing architecture in Brazil. But before he came to Sao Paulo, I should say that he was active in Krakow, and it is not an accident that we are talking about his practice. It was precisely Rynek Główny 25, Main Square 25, where the office of Alfred Dintuch and Stefana Landsbergera used to be. So today, this is the house of the International Cultural Center. We have the opportunity to watch this beautiful window view every day. And in the 1930s, it was Alfred Dintuch and Stefana Landsbergera who could the same window view as we can today. Anyway, this is again one of the reasons why we are talking about Alfred Dinto. This connection of address with this very person. His career was growing in the years of the very successful development of the city of Krakow, especially the west side of the city, especially the area along the Free Poets Boulevard, Aleje Trzech Wieszczów, was developing very fastly. And within 10, maybe 12 years of the late 20s and 30s, we could see hundreds of the tenement houses built in this very part of the city. Right now, they are among the best, they can be found among the best examples of Krakow, but actually of the Polish architecture of that time. And we should say that some of the best buildings in this area, they've been built by the duet of architects, namely Stefan Landsberger, who was born in the year 1901, and Alfred Düntucha. He was born 2 years later, 1903. They studied in Lviv School of Architecture. Alfred Dinto, besides of the technical education, he had also artistic background. He studied at Academy of Fine Arts in Krakow. So besides of being an architect, he was very skilled in, let's say, artistic approach towards architecture. He was very skilled and talented while designing decoration, and his buildings were very unique in the sense of the way the staircases been designed, the ornaments been designed. Here we can see one of his best. Today, maybe not in a good shape, but undoubtedly one of these moments when he was approaching modern movement. Here one more, located on the corner of Słowackiego Street and Lenartowicza Street. As I said already, he was especially known, Dinto, together with Landsberger, they both been very known because of the tenement houses. Their clients were coming from the elites of the city of Krakow. They've been very well connected with some biggest companies of construction materials here in Krakow, especially ceramics. And because of that, they were very easy in getting contacts with the new investors. In here we can see one of the best of his projects, completed actually in the year 1940, when they both were out of Krakow on the way to Brazil. The building was, the construction ended during the Nazi occupation, but it is undoubtedly one of the best examples of the interwar architecture design that we can see in the city of Krakow. But as I said in the very beginning, they both designed more than 30 buildings in a very short period of time, like 3 buildings, 3 tenement houses every year. And every time, what is really surprising is the quality of this architecture. This very peculiar way they were dealing with the smallest detail, the floors, the ceramics on the wall, the railings. It was something very specific and special about their work. And what is also quite interesting is the way they were operating in different parts of the city. In, let's say, more outskirts territories, they were trying to approach modernism. But once they've been dealing with the very city center of Krakow, and right now we are in the hard core of the medieval city at St. Mark Street, they've been trying to find to negotiate between modernism and, let's say, more decorative, history-oriented way of architecture. Again, one more very specific issue of their architecture was the way they were dealing with decoration, and especially with the shields. In the 1930s, there was this common custom, or actually a local law, due to which architects had to put some shield on the front of the facade. And here we can see the pin button factory in Podgórze at Kalwaryjska Street with two heads of elephants keeping pins. But they were very creative in the way they've been designing the shields. There are plenty of different types of them, and I can only invite you to come to Krakow and follow the Alfred Düntucha architecture. But the happy years in Krakow ended in September 1939. They were very lucky in the sense that they were prepared, and they could escape the city, move away from the city, and through Istanbul they found a way to South America. Here we can see Alfred Dinto with his wife and with his daughter. And what is important, once in Brazil, Alfred Dinto quite immediately found contact with the new clients, designing hotels, but also designing luxury apartments. Again, housing architecture, but of a very special quality was the topic of his architecture. Again, with Stefana Landsbergera. And here is his own apartment house. I guess Bobby will tell us more about this very building. And what is really amazing and surprising is that in the early 50s, he was invited to design the new Mercedes-Benz factory in Sao Paulo. So as you can see, sky was the limit for him. But it is not the end of the story. Another chapter of the lineage of Düntuch-Krell family was represented by Olga Krell. In the late 50s, she moved to United States to study at Cornell University. For some time, she was involved in the design of Brasilia, the new capital city of Brazil. And in the 60s and 70s, she was the initiator of the most successful magazine of design and interior architecture, namely Casa Claudia. Here we can see the mother figure of Brazilian design and Brazilian interior decoration, Olga Krell. Today, Bobby is the person who continued this tradition. And now I will stop my presentation and would like to pass the voice to Bobby, and would like to ask about both Alfred Dinto and about Olga Krell. So, Bobby, could we start with the days they moved away from Krakow?
Right. Yes, it was, well, good evening. It's a pleasure speaking to you, away from the other side of the world, but here we are. Alfred Düntucha is something that was a very impressive person. He had a very good mind. He always was looking ahead of his time, very, very ahead of his time. And he was a self-made architect in Krakow, like you mentioned, and he decided to move, when he decided to create all this modernism and thinking of the future, was when the war started to come up upon his front. And he decided and managed to get away to go over to the border and cross over to Turkey and come back to Brazil. And in Brazil, it was something very interesting because we don't know exactly the facts because there wasn't any curriculums or nothing. And he managed to get in contact with some very big investors here in Brazil. And without speaking the language, that's what my mother used to say a lot. He was very creative. He was a pioneer in the architecture in Brazil because there wasn't very big colleges or universities in Brazil. So the Brazilians who had the money wanted to come and contract these immigrants from Poland and design their own projects. So that's one of the first project he got in his life, in his architecture company in Brazil, was the Hotel Turiba, which you mentioned, which he sold the whole idea of the project, not speaking Portuguese, designing the project. And one of the things that he mentioned he loved the most was that you could see on the project of the Turiba is that he really liked the Brazilian vegetation, the gardening. He loved the flowers. He loved the spaces he had to work around. And the Brazilians didn't have a lot of knowledge of architecture or spaces or how to design. So he had the chance to fly on his creativity, design the way he wanted, very spacious areas, very like on the hotel here, nice spacious rooms. The restaurants are very comfortable. The gardening is something he wanted to involve in the architecture, which he didn't have a lot of chance to do that in Krakow. And
one small break. Right now we can see the Turiba Hotel, one of the first buildings designed by Dinto in Brazil.
Right. And this is in a city 2 hours away from Sao Paulo on the mountains called Campos do Jordão. And it's intact until today. The new owner maintained, I know him very well, he maintained exactly the way my grandfather left. Just renewed all the situation, the computers, but the hotel is intact the way it was. And from there on, his company started to grow, and he started to get new buildings and design new buildings. And what left my mother used to mention very happy was that he was free to create. You know, people let him design, they let him create, inclusive the way you mentioned, Michelle, the interior design. He had very nice entrances of the apartments, used different materials. He was very creative in the trends of the modernism in Brazil, which was something that he was very involved with, was creating new things, which one of the buildings, what you showed now, which was a Paquita, which is very famous until today, his architect in Sao Paulo. And the building you mentioned, which he created to live himself on this building, which is Serra Azul, which at the time was something enormous. It was a 600 square meter apartment, which was something very big and very pompous, like we say. It was very...
We can see it right now.
Mm-hmm. Used to live here on the 8th floor of this apartment. Yeah, I lived all my childish until he died, even with my grandmother Antonina at this apartment with them.
And a few years ago, you have published a book about the work of your mother, Olga Krell, Grande Dama de Decoração. In this book, there is information about their journey from Krakow to Brazil. It wasn't only Istanbul, but they travel also through some other countries. Could you say a few words about this really unusual, I guess very tragic as well, journey? They were leaving Europe in such tragic circumstances.
It was something very hard. Like this was something my grandmother never mentioned. Like I had the convenience with my grandfather until I was around 6 years old, and then my grandmother didn't mention a lot. But my mother mentioned that it was very suffering to leave in an urgent way Krakow, which my grandmother's family didn't want to leave. They thought that would never reach the family, the war. And they had a very hard and tough journey through Iraq and the areas around Poland to reach the Turkish area to try to get a boat or ship over to be transferred to Brazil, which was all negotiated through the ways we don't know exactly how we were done at the time, but wasn't very easy. And my grandfather always was a man, like my mother said, he had a head ahead of his time. He was always thinking beyond. Like when you mentioned, when he came to Brazil, he created these buildings. He started working very heavily on architecture and put my mother in American high school here in Brazil, which is very funny because she spoke obviously a little bit of German, a little Polish, a little bit of everything. And then when they reached, she put my mother in American high school. And my mother always had the architecture in her brains all day long, like I had with my mother always. And he directed her with a view, like say, once more and told her, someday you will have to work.
Yeah.
So start planning your life, you know, and this is like on the 1950s. You better prepare yourself. You're going to graduate from American high school here in Sao Paulo. Why don't you go out of the country? So she decided to go to the United States. It was like about 2-day flights from Sao Paulo to New York.
Yeah.
And she went to Cornell, which she graduated with a lot of honors. She was a great student.
Yeah.
But when she came back to Brazil, she worked for 2 or 3 years at Luzar, which was my grandfather's construction and architecture company. But she felt that she didn't have the hand to create like my grandfather did. And my grandfather was a very calm person. The people used to always get on his case, you know, do this, do that. And he was always ready to recreate, to do whatever, everything the clients wanted. And my mother decided to go on another hand, and she decided to go on the side of, she loved the architecture, she loved the interior design and the decorating business, and she decided to show that and discover the Brazilian interior design and architecture business, mainly the home, not really the buildings. Mm-hmm. But like you saw, she was involved with Oscar Niemeyer and Lucio Costa in the construction of the Brasilia. Mm-hmm. But then she thought that she wanted to go into more the interior design and the home architecture, which she really was a pioneer in the Brazilian market that didn't exist. Mm-hmm. So she really had to teach the Brazilian women how to live, how to cook, how to dress, and really how to receive in your house and have a comfortable house. That's when she came upon creating the magazine called Casa Claudia. Like we could say, today, the terms are these influencers, which are on the case. Mm-hmm. She was the largest influencer of Brazil in the architecture and interior design business on the home area. She was like with Casa Claudia. So she was teaching the people how to create their small spaces and become something very comfortable and very cozy. And then became like we do today on the magazine called Revista OK, which is in her memory, OK. Showing the fantastic creativity of the architecture of the Brazilians on the homes and interior design. Brazilians are very creative in using materials, not only the modernism of Jeff Good project like you'll see, even with very typical regional architecture like this in the magazine on Piauí, which is a 5-hour flight from here on the middle of nowhere. We have fantastic interior self-made creators, which do fantastic architecture with all types of material, wood, concrete, whatever thing you could imagine with. Is that the way you could see the Brazilian? And besides that, the creativity is something of the Brazilians is something that surprised all over the world. Like Brazilians love to go to Milano and to the High Point Fair. But like we say, we here in Brazil have a great creativity on the architecture of the homes and interior design. So I'm very interested to see.
Okay, this story is really amazing. And why Claudia?
Claudia is the following. My mother, when she was going to the American high school here, she knew this immigrant from Italy, which called Victor Civita. Uh-huh. And my mother dated his son in school, called Robert Civita. And when she graduated, he was starting the magazine business. He was owner of Editora Abril, which is a big editorial publishing company in Brazil, was growing. Mm-hmm. And when she didn't want to work with my grandfather at the architecture company, she went get a job with him. She said, look, I want to work with you. I want to create. And he said, look, why don't you go home, come back and come with an idea so I could teach a woman how to live. And you are the exact person, because he had 2 sons, Richard and Robert Civita, and his dream was to have a daughter called Claudia, which he never had. Oh. So he got my mother, put her on the poster saying, you are now Claudia, the daughter I never have, go home. Okay. And she created the whole interior design and the living and the well of living business in Brazil, which today is something humongous. It's very, very, very large. And from there, she created the Casa Cor, which I mentioned to you, which is one of the best show houses in the world. Okay. Which is, if whoever wants to see it, called Casa, C-A-S-A, Cor, C-O-R. You'll see fantastic projects where for one whole month, 20 or 30 interior design and architects will go into a house. Each will create their own ambience to really pick up new clients, to get to know new clients. And this is a project I've never seen anywhere in the world, not even in Europe or in the United States, mainly in Brazil. So in Brazil, once the architecture is very big and powerful and very creative, the interior design business in Brazil is very, very powerful. I don't know if anywhere in the world there is this type of creativity like we have in Brazil. And all this was born with her. She created Brazil. She was a pioneer in creating this and finding good architects and good interior designers. And from there on, I decided to take this ahead on the digital business, which before was on paper, which today we don't have it anymore, the purpose. So whoever wants to have a look at the Revista, which Revista OK, and you'll see what we're doing today in Brazil. And it's even better because now it's digital and you could really walk into the houses of the people.
Okay. Wow. What can I say? She had to be an amazing person and a very creative one, very ahead of her time. But let us go back to Alfred Dinto again. He started his work in Brazil with this unusual hotel, but then he moved to big apartment buildings in Sao Paulo. You mentioned that he didn't know the Portuguese language, but he had this ability to get contact with the clients. Could you tell us something more about that?
I really don't have the exact way, but I know that the concept of the big family, which he created, I think even a central picture, Michelle, was the first escalator company in Brazil, elevator company in Brazil called Vilares. And there's a picture of us with my grandfather. He's on the inauguration of the first Brazilian escalator, which was created by this business company. Huh. So it was a very, very big company in Brazil, very powerful. They created elevators and all these escalators. And he was the man who decided to, let's say, put my grandfather under his arm and say, come here, work for me. You have the creativity, you're intelligent, and you're bringing international information for us here in Brazil. Because like we said, we didn't have great creative architecture universities here in Brazil yet at the time. So once he fell, let's say...
say that we can see a Paquita house at the moment right on the screen. It was, I guess, one of the tallest buildings that he completed.
At the time, yes. This was about a 400 square meter apartment, which is very spacious also. And it was very downtown in a very common area of Sao Paulo. 400 square meters.
Wow.
Very, 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 very spacious. I knew someone that lived in that apartment. And he, like we said, he had a great creative mind. He was a pioneer. He had the chance to recreate himself of everything he digested from the schools in Krakow and put all that on paper and put it to sell. And I guess, like we said, this big company called Vilares, they really, I guess, fell in love with his way of working, his way of designing. And like we saw, you saw the Mercedes project. Boy, today people do that in the computer. I don't know how he did that on the 1940s, which is amazing.
Yeah, and what is also very amazing is the quality of design, but also a very up-to-date design. He was very fresh. He could find his way to negotiate between, let's say, Brazilian culture and the 1950s modernism. It was really outstanding, the way that he dealt with this architecture. I should also say that at the end of our meeting, there'll be some time for the questions. And if audience, I see that there is a large group of people with us, would like to ask some questions to Bobby Krell, then please put them on the Facebook chat, and we will be able to go back to these questions at the end of the meeting. And my next question is how big the firm was, the company of Düntucha and Landsbergera in Brazil.
Luzar, which is called the name of the company, Luzar, he had about 40 people working on his staff, because then it became a construction company also. But he was leading with a group of 40 architects, which helped them disinvolve and create and do all the details, like you say. He was a very detailed architect. He was very initial in everything he wanted to create. And there were about 40 people in the company.
Okay.
Which was, for that time, a humongous. Today, like we say, there doesn't almost exist that anymore because of the situation, right? But it was a very, very big company for the time.
At that time in Krakow, the city biggest construction was the huge steel factory in Nową Hutę, few kilometers away from the city center. And precisely the same years, in the early 1950s, Alfred Dinto was involved in Mercedes-Benz in Sao Paulo. Could you tell us something about this project? I guess it was a very prestigious project, very demanding as well. And why it was possible for him, how he achieved that to get this very project?
I think especially because of these investors. Villares is a very, very, very big, powerful company until today in Brazil, and very big in investment business. And I think the contact came through them, which I imagine that's how because this factory is today one of the most popular roads here from Sao Paulo to the coast. And it exists until today. It's fantastic. We can see it from the roadside. It's very, very nice. And I think it was through the connections that it's unfortunately we don't have a lot of details, but we, like I showed you a picture, we knew that he became very, very close to this Villares staff company, and which is a very big, powerful family until today here in Brazil. And I guess with all the constructions, involvements, that's how he got to this involvement with this architect from Mercedes. It's something out of this world. I think it's very modern and for the time, and very advanced. It's update until today. If you go see this company today, it's there until today. It's very actual, the architecture.
Mm-hmm. And I would also like to ask about his memories from Poland, from Krakow. Did he bring some his young years from Poland, Krakow to Brazil? Did he talk about that? Did your mother mention her childhood in Poland, or her parents' memories? Was it anyway present in your family house?
Once they moved to Brazil, I was and my brother were the ones that asked the most questions. But we used to know that my grandmother's family, which is Antonina, was very, very wealthy in the city. Mm-hmm. And they did a lot of parties. My mother used to mention that my grandmother's family was very united. They did a lot of parties. They were always together. And my grandfather was a little reserved, more reserved than my grandmother. Okay. But she mentioned that her young childish stories that she remembered in Poland were very happy. A lot of family together, a lot of things doing together with the family. So my grandfather already worked a lot at the time, and my grandmother didn't work. So my mother ended up being a lot with my grandmother and the family, and not with my grandfather. It worked most of his time, especially when they moved to Brazil also. For the first years they were in Brazil, my mother said she used to see him 2 or 3 hours a day because he wouldn't stop. He was very, very active man. He was always punctual with his promises, always introducing what he had to do, was very, very active.
Mm-hmm. And could you tell us also something about Stefan Landsberger, his business partner? Landsberger was a member of the very prosperous family in Krakow. They were very strong in, let's say, construction business. They were producing ceramics. And because of these Landsberger connections, they, I guess, both with Düntuch, they started their career in Krakow. But they moved together to Brazil. And could you tell us something about Landsberger?
Stefan Landsberger, I only had mainly contact with them in the family meetings and the dinners, and because I was very small at the time. But they were, I could say they were very, very friends. Every event or every family event we had, both of them were together always. They were very close. They worked together very close, but I didn't have a lot of contact directly with him.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you told me also about one tragic story that happened in Switzerland. Could you bring also this memory, quite tragic, as I said, but actually very talkative concerning Alfred Dinto?
Yes, he inscribed his architecture. I don't know if it was a Paquita or one of these buildings in an international worldwide architecture prize, which the big party in which he won the prize was in Switzerland. And it was a black tie party. He was a man that used to love going out, dancing a lot. My grandmother used to mention a lot. He was a very happy, very dancing person. And they went to this prize in Switzerland, which he was honored, and he won the prize. And he was very, very happy. And like that was one of the things my grandfather mentioned, my mother, that he danced all night. And when he sat down, he was about his early 50s. He sat down in the chair, said, "I'm very tired." And suddenly he passed away, unfortunately. But I think the main happiness that he ever had was getting this worldwide prize in Switzerland. And I guess it was so happy, they said, "Wow, let me go."
Well, it's a sad story, so I'm very sorry that I can stop my laugh, but it's such an amazing story, a film one, a movie one.
Very impressive. Very impressive.
But I wanted to ask you about this memory. And I would also like to ask about his approach towards architecture. While in Krakow, he was on the one hand side very open towards the modernism that was coming to Poland, that was developing in Europe. On the other hand side, he was also very skilled in designing decorations. Krakowians, they were in love with decorations, and ornaments were very important here. But once he moved to Brazil, I guess he get to find out some kind of a way to more advanced technologically and more, let's say, modern in terms of design architecture. So what kind of a designer he was?
He was very perfectionist. He was like my mother used to say, he wanted to design the whole building, the whole floor, all the details of the entrance, like you mentioned, all the materials and the ceramics used on the entrance, on the staircase, which he designed. Even he went into the closet. The women had to brief him how she wanted her closet, but to put her clothes in the closet. He went to even to these small details of the apartments, which was something amazing. It wasn't very common here in Brazil. Mm-hmm. So these rich people that had a lot of clothes, they had all these makeup coats, they wanted to leave everything perfect. If I don't have pictures, unfortunately, of my grandmother's apartment, but if you see her wardrobe, and there was just such details, it was just something amazing. And he also did some design in furniture also. He designed the furniture of the apartments, designed all the tables, because I'm moving, so I don't have a picture, which I would like to show you. But he was very detailed on every aspect of the interior design of the apartment also. Mm-hmm.
And I see the first question on the Facebook. Michał Kępiński asked if Alfred Dinto have connections to Lucian Korngold. Actually, I also wanted to ask this question. So if you could tell us also about this time Warsaw-based architect.
Yes, they were very kind of united when they moved to Brazil. I mean, it was a small colony of Polish architects, which were in high demand, like you said. I had small contact with them also. Like I said, I was very young. but they were very united. They were very communicative. They exchanged a lot of ideas. Because first, after there were opportunity to have their pleasure speaking Polish with their friends, which they knew from some time, and they exchanged a lot of ideas on their projects and on their works, which was very important for him. But I don't have exact more details. I used to see him when I was very small, mainly socially.
Okay.
But I know that they were very close, they were very united, and I know that they exchanged a lot of ideas. And obviously, in a country they didn't even speak the language, it must have been really close, more than today.
Trying to find some more information about Alfred Dinto, I searched on the internet and I found the Polish newspaper published in Brazil in the 50s and 60s, namely the Polish Review. And there was an interview with Alfred Dinto in which he was talking about Brazilian architecture that he was really amazed with. He was talking also about Brasilia that was under construction at that time. And I wondered if there was some kind of the Polish milieu, maybe milieu of the Polish architects, what kind of connections in this Polish architects colony you could find.
It was very small. Today it changed a lot, but it was very small. Like when Brasilia was growing, I mean, they picked up Oscar Niemeyer, which was an architect to design the Brasilia, but he did it all through his mind. Let's say he didn't involve a lot of people from other countries. They wanted to do something the Brazilian way of architecture, but I had little contact with them information of how they used to communicate themselves and how they created. But it was very interesting. Basically, is that the Brazilians thought that the Polish architects immigrated to Brazil had much more information, much more technology than what was proposed from Brazil.
But you mentioned Warszawczyk as one of the people that your grandfather was acquainted with.
Yes, Warszawczyk, I went to school with his grandson with me, who called Carlos Warszawczyk. They were very pioneers. Once we'll meet together with Raul Justis. He has more information. He managed to interview Warszawczyk. I know Warszawczyk through his modernism buildings also. His Warszawczyk's son, which would be Olga, did a lot of the homes in the modernism buildings. And I went to school with Eduardo, which was his net, but we all went to the American high school. But they had very big connections. They were very involved. There was a lot of family reunions, a lot of parties, and I know they did a lot of business together. A lot of connections. And until today, I see Warszawczyk until today.
And let us talk again about Olga Krell. Why Cornell and why United States decided for her to go to study? Was it her choice or was it somehow initiated by the Alfred Dinto?
I think there was a big brainwashing of the architecture of Alfred on her mind. American high school, which created this opportunity for her to go to the United States. And at the time and until today, Cornell is one of the largest architecture schools in the United States. And she was a very, very high grade level in Sao Paulo. She got very, very good grades. In Cornell, you have to be a great point average to go up to Cornell. And she decided that from one thing to the next, and my grandfather already was putting on her mind, you will have to work someday in your life. So prepare yourself. It's going to be art or whatever you want to do, but prepare yourself. In the future, the women will have to work. And he put in their mind, and she went to Cornell. She graduated with honors from Cornell. She had a lot of classmates, which are very famous until today in the American architecture, and she decided to come back and work heavy duty, not only in architecture, but in creating the magazine that teach the people how to live well, like we say here in Brazil.
And how this idea came from? I mean, not to continue directly her father company and career, not to do architecture, but to focus on the interiors and to run the magazine?
She when she used to, on the beginning of her work, where she used to work next to my grandfather and go to the clients, where the client used to ask what she wanted in the house, give her all the briefing, and she just managed to know that, see that the Brazilians didn't have a notion of how to create and prepare a house to be well lived in, like we used to say. The house has to be comfortable, cozy. And she saw a gap there that was missing in the Brazilian. The Brazilians they were doing the great architect, but no one were doing the good interior design, which she found that this great necessity. And from there, she decided to create this idea in the Casa Claudia. Mm-hmm. She brought the idea and saw the difficulties that my grandfather really had to create, because he had the architect, sorry, let me see what happened here.
Everything's okay.
Okay. Yeah, she saw that there was a big difficulty on him creating the interior design, which he had, but it took more time to design the interior design of what the wife of the man that ordered his architect were asking, demanding, than the proper architecture. So she decided that once she left the company, to create something which became Casa Claudia, to teach the people like the Americans. Americans know how to do it themselves. They create themselves their home. They do it themselves, like we say. And here in Brazil, no, they really contract an interior design to do the whole projects, which you see at the Revista OK. It's amazing. People spend $2, $3, $4 million in the interior design of a house. Mm-hmm. It's something out of this world. So she found that there was this big necessity, not only the architecture, which we have fantastic in Brazil, but especially the interior design, which was a problem that people didn't know how to do, because the Brazilians didn't know how to cook, they didn't know how to dress, they didn't know how to do anything. And she's the one that taught them how to create, how to set a table, like I said in your book. People didn't know how to set a table in Brazil. So she decided to create a guide to teach the Brazilian woman how to put a table to receive the people from a fantastic dinner. People didn't know how to do that. We have maids. Brazil has a lot of opportunity to have maids to work with you at the house, so they could cook today, so they could put set tables. But at the time, there wasn't that. Mm. So she decided to teach the Brazilians how to work with that.
Mm. Wow. Right now you are running the magazine called OK.
OK. It's called Revista OK, yes.
Revista OK. And I understand that OK comes from Olga Krell.
Olga Krell. And the Krell is, like I mentioned to you, very interesting. When my mother became Krell, my grandfather liked to create jewelry. He created everything. He created furniture. Wow. And he decided to create a brochure for her, which became OK from Olga Krell. Mm-hmm. And from that brochure, I created a big trophy from a big prize we used to do until my mother died, which was called Prêmio Olga Krell, which was a prize for interior design and architecture in Brazil, which she wanted to really incentivize the people and their creativity, use new materials, all sorts of things. And then I created this trophy, which became OK. And that became very popular here in Brazil. And from there, when I created the magazine, I said, why not continue the OK legado, like we say here in Brazil, showing that it became maintaining Olga Krell until the end.
And I also, I was wondering if Alfred Dinto was somehow acquainted to this whole milieu of architects from this, let's say, golden generation of Brazilian modern architecture at the time when he was very active and very prosperous and successful in Sao Paulo. Precisely at the same time, Brasilia was under construction. Mm-hmm. What was his idea about the new capital city of Brazil, and was he somehow connected to Lúcio Costa and Oscar Niemeyer?
I don't really know if they had the chance or they ever met. I think my grandfather had connections with Lúcio Costa, mm-hmm. not Oscar Niemeyer. Oscar Niemeyer was a big star, very involving. I think he had some type of connections with Lúcio Costa at the time, mm-hmm. but not very intense. I don't remember much of that. But like we were saying a little bit of my mother. My mother came from a story in Cornell, which Richard Meyer, I think you know Richard Meyer, was one of her classmates. You know, so she had a lot of contact with Richard Meyer, like we say. Even on, if you look at the Instagram, Olhar OK, you'll see a picture with a few years ago, like 10 years ago, when she met her great friend from college was Richard Meyer. So they had a lot of involvements with all this. It's very interesting.
Well, so many amazing stories, so many intriguing connections between Krakow and Sao Paulo. I've never thought that such connections could happen. So thank you so much for all of this information. And now I would like to ask the people who are with us, who are watching this very discussion, if there are any questions, because if there are so, then please put them on the Facebook chat. I think it's a best time to ask them, and maybe there'll be an opportunity to put some new ideas and some new thoughts to this very discussion. I would like to ask one more question about Krakow and Lviv. If Alfred Dinto mentioned anything about his education once he was in Brazil, did he ever comment the school? Did he ever comment the school that he received education from?
What I remember and that he mentioned a few times was how dedicated he was to his studies, how hard it was, because he's a self-made architect man, let's say. There was no family, no rich money involved. He didn't come from a very sophisticated high school, of what I know of. So it was a lot of dedication that he did, which he loved the profession of architecture. And he really penetrated and did a good concentration of learning and getting good grades. He said, I have to be someone very important, because of what I know, my grandmother's family was very important in the city of Krakow. And he said he had to be a self-made man, because he didn't want to bypass the architecture using my grandmother's family. He wanted to do it by himself. So he has said he had to work a lot, do a lot of training program, a lot of designing, and a lot of perfectionism on what was his goal of being a good architect.
Okay, so he liberated himself somehow from under the wings of the family of his wife. I see some questions. Piotr Lewicki is asking about Revista OK, what it is about. Could you tell us some more about your project?
Yes, Revista OK is just a continuation of what my mother used to do. We think Brazilians in all the world think that the architecture and design of the other countries are better than ours. Like Brazilians love the Italian Philip Stark, Urquiola, or the American Richard Myers and those. But we have a great quality of architects and interior designer, inclusively. We have like the largest furniture companies in the world here in Brazil. And I decided to show what we have of quality of this architecture and design in Brazil in the Revista OK. So once you go into the magazine, you will be able to see the creativity of the Brazilian architects. It kind of bothers me a lot, this new modernism of influencers, like we say, which are people that don't know a lot of the background. They want to talk from today into the future. But we have good quality of architects and designers in Brazil. And this is where my mother came in when she taught the people how to show their products. And I want to teach this new generation that they could create themselves. They have good quality. The Brazilians have a lot of materials. We have an enormous country and people use a lot of the gardening. Like we say, we have the Amazon and we have the extreme. We have Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo, we call it the concrete jungle. But around the city, we have a lot of these neighborhoods and a lot of these condominiums with some fantastic houses. So in the Revista OK, you'll have the opportunity to see the talents of the Brazilian architects and designers, mainly on the home area. And sorry, I do a lot of hotels also. Once I brought in the Turiba, which I decided to bring ahead, you will see a lot of fantastic hotel architects from the Amazon, from Bahia, which are very rustic and very quality type, and especially materials used from the Brazilian architects.
Well, we can be jealous while observing the Revista OK and the quality of design in Brazil. We can also be very happy that there is some small piece of Krakow in it. I see some more questions. Karolina Szaraniec is asking, have you ever been in Krakow and seen buildings created by your grandfather?
Yes, I was in Krakow 4 years ago, and I was very impressed. But it's still, like you say, it's a change of culture is very big. We live obviously in a humongous country, which is Brazil. We have 9,000 kilometers of beach. So Brazilians are very outskirts. They like a lot to be outside, the houses, the pools. But I was very impressed. I spent 10 days in Krakow, seeing everything. I went especially 2 days just to see all the buildings he constructed. And like we say, boy, he had a big creativity for that time. It was just something amazing. And I would love to go back to Krakow. It was great. It was great being there.
You should go back definitely again. And one more question right now from Tomek Kuncewicz. Why did they choose Brazil as a country to escape from Poland?
I think it was opportunities. Like we said, people went to Argentina. A lot of Polish went to Uruguay. And a lot of Polish came to Brazil, especially in the south of Brazil called Curitiba. There's a large community of Polish in the south of Brazil, especially called Curitiba area. I guess it was opportunity had where they could get the ship to come to. And my grandfather and mother came through Recife, which is way north of Brazil. And then they got a ship all the way down to Sao Paulo, which Recife, for you to have an idea, is a 6-hour flight from here to Recife. It's very far. So Brazil is something, I don't know why, but we have large colonies. We're the largest colony of Japanese in the world here in Brazil. One of the largest Italian colonies in the world is here in Brazil also. So we have a big mix and match here.
Okay, there is also a question about the family that stayed in Poland. Do you know about their fate? Did you have some relatives in Poland today?
I did not meet. I know there's some relatives that maintain, because the Polish government got in contact with us, and they're kind of like my grandfather had a lot of buildings in Krakow, and we're being able to sell some of the buildings my grandfather had, but my grandmother's family was very big. So, but I never had a mentor, never had a contact with anyone. The only ones I had a mention was some from my grandmother's brothers went to New York, which I met some of them in New York, but about 20 years ago, not anymore.
There is also a question from Zuzanna Waligura. What was the approach of Düntuch family to the Jewish origins? Were they religious? Were they a part of the Jewish community in Sao Paulo?
Yes. But not so intense like it should have been, like we say, because my grandfather worked all the first 10, 20 years, 15 years in Brazil. He was heavy duty working. I mean, they were involved in the Jewish cause, even though he designed two synagogues here in Brazil.
Oh,
he did two architects, which Raul Justus will be a pleasure to show you. He designed 1 or 2 synagogues here in Brazil, and he was very active with that. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I see also a question about Karolina Sorotiuk is asking if there are any pictures of the interior design of Alfred Dinto that you mentioned. I guess that on the internet it is quite easy to find the website about Alfred Dinto project. So I will put some links on the chat later on. But if you would like to, I remember our first discussion. You mentioned that he was a person that was very ahead of his time, that he was thinking like 10 years in the future. Could you tell us something more about this approach, this way of being, this way of connecting with the civilization, with the world?
Yeah, I think all this experience that he had from when he brought in from Poland when he came to Brazil, the first thoughts of putting my mother in American high school is something very interesting, not to the Brazilian colony, but into American high school. And I mean, even today, who has a daughter 18 years old, it's hard for you to send away from your country to go study in another country, like in the US. I think of my daughter. I have an 18-year-old daughter, which is going to be graduating this year. And she's thinking of going to the US. I'm already a little bit scared. I couldn't imagine him 60 years ago sending my mother to the US and saying, you go on the adventure, I'm going to pay, thinking that the women would have to work in the future, which is something exactly what every woman in the world is working on heavy duty, that's having their chance to have an opportunity to put their work in the market. We have in Brazil, a lot of fantastic women architects. But he was always ahead of his time on the creation of the innovation, designing some furniture. Like we said, I don't have a lot of, unfortunately, pictures of his apartment, which was something gorgeous. I'm going to look into that. And if I have, I'll send you some of the pictures of his apartment, which is fantastic. All the details, and we have all the details. It was something out of this world, the way he created.
Well, thank you so much for all of these stories. Once in Krakow, we are passing by the buildings. The buildings designed by your grandfather, they are already almost 100 years old, 90 years old. At the moment, here in Krakow and here in Poland, we are more and more discussing this period and this architecture, seeing it as also our obligation and also as our heritage. And also as a monuments. Today we have this International Day of Monuments. So modern movement and especially architecture from the 20s and 30s today should be remembered and should be seen also from this very perspective. But architecture, it is also a way to discuss the people. And I'm so very happy and grateful that we could learn about unusual person, I mean Alfred Düntucha, and about Stefan Landsberger as well, his business partner, and about the continuation of their work, as well as about Olga Krell, the grand madame of Brazilian design. So let me come back to Krakow, to Rynek Główny 25, Main Square 25. This address connects the International Cultural Center with the history of Düntuch family. And well, Bobby, thank you so very much. I hope it's not the only meeting, and I hope that we'll have also some other opportunities to remind Poland about the work of Alfred Dinto, about the work of Olga Krell, and about the work you do at the moment in Brazil. Thank you so much.
And I think that the talk that we'll have with Raul Justis, which is a big journalist, and he digged in very deep in this information, will help us really for you to know more about Landsberger and Düntuch. He has great information about that.
Raul Justis is a Brazilian journalist who published recently a book about skyscrapers of Sao Paulo, and it is one of the very new and fresh research dedicated to the 1950s architecture of this very city. So while preparing for this discussion, we were discussing also the work of Raul Justis. So thank you so much for mentioning him. Right. And well, have a good afternoon.
You too. Thank you very much. You have a good evening.
In Krakow, it's already 8 p.m. I understand that in Sao Paulo, it's 3 p.m.
3
So
p.m.
have a good afternoon, and thank you once again so much for this meeting, for this discussion.
And thank you all. And whoever wants to meet about Brazil, have a look at Revista OK, www.revistaok.com.br, and you'll have a little bit of more information of the Brazilian architect today.
Thank you so much. Revista OK.
Good night. Good evening. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.